What if I told you that a regular father, someone just like you, died for 7 minutes and came back with a warning that will shake you to your core? He wasn't a saint. He wasn't a sinner by society's standards. He was just ordinary, working his shift, kissing his kids goodnight, scrolling through his phone before bed. But on one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Death came without warning. And what he experienced in those 7 minutes on the other side would haunt him forever. He saw the flames. He felt the heat. He heard the screaming. And in that place of absolute terror, where darkness swallows hope and fire consumes souls, he learned a truth that most people refuse to believe until it's too late. This isn't fiction. This isn't a dream. This is his testimony. A testimony of hell, redemption, and a second chance that came with a price. Before we dive into what happened when his heart stopped beating, you need to understand who he was. Because he was no different than you or me. And that's what makes this story so terrifying. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m. He merged onto the highway, radio playing some forgotten song, his mind already at home. His daughter's birthday was 3 days away. He'd promised her a bicycle, pink with streamers on the handlebars. He smiled at the thought, and he saw it. A flash of silver in his peripheral vision. Time didn't slow down like they say in movies. It exploded. The semi-truck blasted through the red light at 70 miles per hour, and the last thing his mind registered was the company logo on its side. Then impact. The sound was ungodly. Metal screaming, glass becoming 1,000 daggers. His car spun 3 times before slamming into the concrete barrier. His chest hit the steering wheel with such force that his ribs cracked like dry branches. But here's what nobody tells you about dying. The pain stops. Suddenly. Completely. He was looking at the roof of his car, watching blood drip upward. No, not upward. He was rising. Floating. Disconnected. Below him, his body sat twisted in the driver's seat, head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes half open and vacant. A woman was running toward the wreckage, phone pressed to her ear, screaming words he couldn't hear. A man pulled over, hands on his head, mouth forming the word "Nover" and over. And he watched it all from above. Calm, detached, free. He tried to speak, to tell them he was okay, that he was right here, but no sound came. His body didn't move. That's when the truth hit him harder than the truck ever could. That body down there, broken and bleeding, was just a shell. And he, the real him, was somewhere else entirely. The strangest part? He wasn't afraid, not yet. He felt light, peaceful, almost euphoric. Like waking from a long, exhausting dream. He thought about his wife, his daughters. Would they be okay? Would they understand? Then something shifted. The air grew heavy. The light around him began to fade. Not gradually, but like someone had flipped a switch on reality itself. The faces of the people below blurred. The sounds of sirens dissolved into static. And then nothing. An absence so complete it felt like existence itself was being erased. He tried to hold on to something, anything, the memory of his daughter's laugh, his wife's touch, but it all slipped away like water through his fingers. The darkness wasn't just around him, it was inside him, consuming him, pulling him down into a depth that had no bottom. This is where his story truly begins. In the void between life and what comes after. In the space where souls are weighed and destinations are revealed. He was falling. And something terrible was waiting below. The fall had no end. Or maybe it did, and that's what terrified him most. He tumbled through absolute nothingness, spinning in a void where up and down lost all meaning. How long did it last? Seconds? Hours? Time had no grip here. Then came the heat. Subtle at first, like standing near an oven. Within moments, it intensified. His skin prickled. Sweat that shouldn't exist on a soul began to form. The temperature climbed higher, higher, until it felt like his flesh was melting off invisible bones. And still, he fell. The darkness began to glow. A deep, blood-red pulse emanating from below. The light grew stronger, angrier, revealing what had been hidden in the black walls. No, not walls. Surfaces of stone that writhed and moved like living tissue, slick with something he didn't want to identify. The air itself seemed infected, thick and rancid, filling his lungs with each gasping breath. Then he heard them. Voices. Distant at first, like echoes from the bottom of a well. But they grew louder, closer, screaming, not the scream of surprise or even pain. This was something ancient. Something that came from a place deeper than the throat. The scream of souls who had been screaming for so long they'd forgotten they'd ever known silence. He wanted to cover his ears, but his hands passed through his head like smoke. He tried to close his eyes, but they wouldn't shut. He was forced to witness everything. The fall ended with brutal suddenness. He slammed into scorched ground that burned on contact. The impact should have shattered every bone, but there were no bones to break here. Only sensation, only suffering. He pushed himself up and finally saw where he was. Hell, the word felt inadequate. This wasn't the cartoonish red cavern with pitchforks and horned demons. This was worse, far worse. It was a landscape of agony. Rivers of fire cut through valleys of ash. The sky, if you could call it that, churned with smoke so thick it pressed down like a physical weight. And everywhere, figures moved in the flames. Some crawled. Some stood frozen, faces locked in eternal horror. Others wandered aimlessly, their mouths open in perpetual screams that blended into a symphony of despair. He recognized something profound in that moment. These weren't monsters. They were people. Humans who had lived, breathed, made choices. Now they were here, forever. The flames wrapped around his legs like serpents. The pain was beyond description, beyond comprehension. It wasn't just physical. It burned through his soul, through his very essence, igniting every regret, every sin, every moment of selfishness he'd ever experienced. This wasn't punishment. This was separation. Complete and total separation from everything good, everything pure, everything divine. And the worst part, he knew he deserved to be here. Then something shifted. The flames didn't stop burning, but they changed. They became a mirror, not reflecting his face, but his life. Every moment, every choice, every secret he thought had died with time. It started with the small things. The lies he told at work to avoid responsibility. The times he'd snapped at his wife because he was tired, because she'd interrupted his game, because he simply didn't want to listen. He watched himself scroll past a homeless man, eyes averted, pretending not to see. Such a small moment, meaningless, he'd thought. But here, in this place of ultimate truth, he felt what that man had felt. The rejection, the invisibility, the crushing weight of being ignored by another human being. The flames intensified. Bigger moments now. His teenage years, mocking a classmate for being different, for being weak. He'd forgotten that boy's name decades ago. But the boy hadn't forgotten. He saw him now, sitting alone at lunch, the damage spreading through his young mind like cracks in glass. One cruel joke, one moment of choosing popularity over kindness, and it had shaped a life. Then came the darkness he'd hidden, even from himself. The addiction to pornography that had slowly poisoned his view of women, of his own wife. The emotional affairs that never became physical, but had already betrayed every vow he'd made. The rage he'd nursed against his father, letting bitterness grow roots so deep they'd strangled his capacity for forgiveness. Every Sunday morning he'd chosen sleep over seeking something greater. Every moment of convenience over character. Every time he'd said, I don't have time, when what he really meant was, I don't care enough. The flames showed him his daughters. How many times had they asked him to play, and he'd said later while staring at his phone? How many school events had he missed because work seemed more important? He watched his youngest practice a song for weeks, desperate to perform it for him, only to have him walk through the door too exhausted to listen. The light in her eyes dimming. Her learning that she wasn't priority, that she wasn't enough. But the worst was yet to come. The flames peeled back the final layer, revealing the core of who he'd been, not a monster, not evil by the world's standards, but utterly, completely self-absorbed. Every decision filtered through one question: what do I want? His entire existence had been a shrine built to himself. His comfort, his pleasure, his advancement, his reputation. God had been an afterthought, a distant concept to acknowledge on holidays and ignore the rest of the year. And now he understood. Hell wasn't just about punishment. It was about truth. The brutal, inescapable truth of what he built his life upon. Sin, all of it sinned, and now the tide had come in. The weight of it all crushed him. Not physically, but in a way far more devastating. His soul, if that's what remained, collapsed under the burden of absolute truth. He fell to his knees on the burning ground, no longer feeling the heat because the pain inside had become infinite. This was it. This was forever. The flames would never stop. The screaming would never end. The truth would never fade. Eternity stretched before him like an ocean without shores, and he was drowning in it. Every second here felt like 1,000 years, and there would be no escape, no relief, no hope. Just this, forever and ever and ever. Something broke inside him then. Not his spirit, that had already shattered. Something deeper. The lost wall of pride that had held him together his entire life. The wall that said, "I'm good enough. I can handle this. I don't need anyone." It crumbled to dust. For the first time since childhood, since before he'd learned to hide vulnerability behind confidence and jokes, he was completely, utterly helpless. And he knew it. There was no bargaining here. No deals to make. No second chances to negotiate. He had nothing to offer. No good deeds to stack on a scale. No righteousness to claim as his own. Every achievement, every moment of charity, every time he'd helped someone, it all meant nothing, because it had all been contaminated by the poison of self-interest. Even his good deeds had been about him, about feeling good, about looking good, about building the life he wanted, he'd given to get, loved to be loved, served to be seen. And now, stripped of everything, he saw the truth. He was bankrupt, spiritually, morally, completely bankrupt. But in that moment of absolute bankruptcy, something else emerged. Not hope, he was beyond hope, but something primal, something that transcends logic and pride. The cry of a soul that has nothing left but honesty. His mouth opened, and a sound came out that he didn't recognize. Raw, guttural, a scream that came from the deepest part of his being. Jesus! The name tore from his throat like a confession, like a surrender, like the last word of a dying man. Jesus, please, help me! The flames roared louder as if angered by the name. The darkness pressed in harder. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. "I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry for everything, for all of it." Tears streamed down his face, evaporating instantly in the heat. "I don't deserve mercy, I know I don't, but please." His voice cracked, breaking into sobs. "Please don't leave me here. I can't do this. I can't be here forever. Jesus, if you're real, if you can hear me, please." It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't theological. It was the desperate, broken cry of a man who had finally understood that he needed a savior, not a teacher, not an example, not a philosopher, a savior. Someone to rescue him from what he could not escape on his own. And in that moment of complete surrender, in the depths of hell itself, something changed. The air shifted. A presence entered that place where no presence should exist. Something was coming. Someone was answering. The change was instantaneous. A light pierced through the darkness, not from above, but from within the flames themselves. It shouldn't have been possible. Nothing good could exist in this place. Yet there it was, cutting through the smoke and screams like a sword through fabric. The light didn't blind, it clarified, it revealed. And every tortured soul in that place turned toward it, drawn by something they'd forgotten existed. Hope. He lifted his head, tears still streaming, and saw him walking through the flames. Jesus. He knew it without being told, without needing proof. The same way you know your own name, the same way you recognize home. This was the presence that every human soul was designed to recognize, the frequency every heart was tuned to from creation. He walked through hell as if it were a garden. The flames bent away from him, not in fear, but in reverence. Where his feet touched the scorched ground, it cooled. The screaming dimmed, not because the torment stopped, but because something greater had entered. Something that made even hell pause. His face held no condemnation, no disgust. "No, I told you so." Just an intensity of love so profound it was almost painful to witness. A love that saw everything, every sin, every failure, every selfish choice, and loved anyway. Not because those things didn't matter, but because he had already paid for them. The scars proved it. As Jesus drew closer, he saw them. The wounds in his hands, the mark on his side. Fresh, as if they'd never healed. As if they still bled for this very moment, in this very place, for this very soul. Those scars were the price of admission into hell, the only passport that could breach its gates. Jesus stopped in front of him and extended his hand. That scarred hand, that pierced palm. And he understood something that shattered him all over again. This wasn't a rescue mission for someone worthy. This was mercy for the bankrupt, grace for the guilty, salvation for the damned. Jesus had descended into hell itself, not because he deserved it, but because he couldn't save himself. "Take my hand." The voice was gentle, but it carried authority that made the darkness tremble. Not the voice of a distant deity issuing commands, but of a shepherd who'd left 99 to find the one. Of a father running toward a prodigal son. Of a king who became a servant to save his enemies. He reached up with a trembling hand, expecting to be rejected at the last second. Expecting to be told it was too late, that he'd waited too long, that the offer had expired. But Jesus' hand closed around his firmly, warmly, completely. The moment their hands touched, everything changed. The flames released him. The heat vanished. The screaming faded into silence. And he felt himself being pulled upward, lifted from that place of torment by a grip that would never let go. The souls around them watched in stunned silence, and he wondered if they too had called out, if they too had surrendered, or if pride still kept them chained. As he rose through the darkness, held in arms that had been stretched on a cross, he wept. Not from pain now, but from the overwhelming weight of undeserved love. He'd been in hell. He deserved to stay there. But Jesus had come anyway. That was the gospel. Not that good people go to heaven, but that Jesus descends into hell to bring the lost ones home. They rose through layers of darkness, ascending through realms he couldn't name. The transition was disorienting, like waking from one dream into another. Then suddenly, they were somewhere else entirely. Not heaven, not earth, but a space between. A place of light so pure it made everything he'd ever seen look like shadow. Jesus held him there, suspended in that radiance, and for the first time since the accident, he felt safe, whole, clean. The shame that had crushed him in hell was gone, washed away by a mercy he couldn't comprehend. But he could feel Jesus looking at him, not at his body, but into his soul, seeing everything that remained, every hidden corner, every future choice, every possibility. And when Jesus finally spoke, his words bypassed his ears and wrote themselves directly onto his heart. You've seen the truth now. You know what awaits those who reject me. You know the weight of sin. You know the reality of separation. The words weren't accusatory. They were matter of fact, gentle even, but heavy with eternal significance. Then Jesus showed him something else. Images flooded his mind, vivid and undeniable. His wife, dressed in black, standing over a casket. His daughters, older now, haunted by questions they'd never get to ask him. Christmases without him. Graduations without him. Weddings where his chair sat empty. But there was more. He saw other lives too. A co-worker who'd been watching him, wondering if faith was real, who would abandon his search if this man's story ended here. A neighbor who needed to hear what he'd experienced. His own daughters who would grow up believing death was the end, unless someone showed them it wasn't. Strangers' faces flashed before him. People he hadn't met yet. Moments that hadn't happened. Conversations that could change eternities. A web of influence spreading out from his life like ripples on water, touching shores he'd never see. Your time on earth isn't finished. Jesus' voice was firm now, carrying the weight of divine purpose. I'm sending you back, not because you deserve it. You know you don't, but because my grace is greater than your failure, and my plans are bigger than your mistakes. The words struck him like lightning. Go back? To his broken body? To the pain? To the mundane routine of bills and traffic and ordinary life? After experiencing this? You have a mission now, Jesus continued, and his eyes burned with intensity. Tell them what you saw. Tell them hell is real. Tell them I am real. Tell them their choices have eternal consequences. Tell them that I love them enough to die for them, but I won't force them to accept it. He felt the weight of it settling on him. How could he explain this? Who would believe him? People would call him crazy. They'd say it was oxygen deprivation, hallucinations, trauma-induced delusions. They'd mock him, dismiss him. He'd lose friends, maybe his job, his reputation. I know what it will cost you, Jesus said, reading his thoughts. But some will listen. Some will turn. Some will be saved from what you experienced. And on that day when you return here, this time through the door instead of the fire, you'll see them. The ones who heard. The ones who believed. The ones who chose me because you had the courage to speak. Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder, and power flowed through that touch. Not physical power, but something deeper, authority, purpose. The Holy Spirit settling into his soul like a sword being placed in its sheath. Go now. Live differently. Love deeply. Speak boldly. And know that I am with you every moment until you come home. The light began to fade. Or rather, he began to fade from it. He felt himself being pulled backward, downward, towards something heavy and painful. His body, reality, earth. Wait! He cried out. How do I do this? How do I make them understand? Jesus' final words followed him down through the dimensions, echoing in his spirit. Just tell them what I did for you. The rest is my work, not yours. The descent back was violent. Like being sucked through a tunnel at impossible speed, reality compressing around him. Sound returned first. Rhythmic beeping, frantic voices, the hiss of machines. Then sensation, cold, sharp, stabbing cold that felt like knives after the heat of hell. And pain, oh God, the pain. Every nerve ending in his body screamed awake simultaneously. His chest felt crushed, his ribs were broken. Blood filled his mouth, but he was alive. His eyes flew open to blinding white light, hospital fluorescence. Faces hovered above him, masked and urgent. He's back, we've got him, heart rate stabilizing. A doctor's voice, shocked and relieved. Someone was crying. His wife. He could hear her before he could see her, that distinctive sob that only comes from grief interrupted by miracle. 7 minutes. That's what they told him later. His heart had stopped for 7 minutes. Clinically dead. No pulse, no breath. No brain activity for the last 3. They've been calling it. Preparing to tell his wife. Writing the time of death. Then suddenly, impossibly, his heart had restarted on its own. No defibrillator, no drugs. Just a spontaneous return that the doctors had no medical explanation for. They called it a miracle, though they used words like extremely rare spontaneous recovery in the charts. But he knew what had happened. Jesus had sent him back. The physical recovery took weeks. Broken ribs, collapsed lung, severe concussion, internal bleeding. His body had been destroyed in the crash. But his soul had been transformed in the fire. And that transformation was what everyone noticed. When he could finally speak, barely a whisper through damaged vocal cords, he told them everything. His wife sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face as he described the flames. The screaming, the weight of truth, and the scarred hand that pulled him out. She believed him. She'd felt something change in their home the moment he'd woken up, a presence. A peace that hadn't been there before. His daughters came to visit, scared by the tubes and machines, but he held them as tightly as his broken body would allow and whispered promises he intended to keep. He would be there, really there, present, engaged, the father they deserved. Not everyone believed his story. His brother thought it was trauma. A co-worker suggested therapy. A friend sent him articles about near-death hallucinations, about DMT released by the dying brain, about pattern seeking in moments of crisis. He understood their skepticism. He would have reacted the same way before. But he couldn't unsee what he'd seen. Couldn't unfeel what he'd felt. Couldn't deny the scars on hands that had pulled him from eternal fire. So he spoke anyway, at first just to individuals. Then to small groups. His testimony spread quietly through his community. Some people listened with hungry eyes, sensing truth in his words. Others walked away uncomfortable, preferring their comfortable uncertainties to his uncomfortable certainties. He lost friends, gained others. His life became simpler in some ways, more complicated in others. But there was a clarity now, a purpose. Every morning when he wakes up, he remembers those flames. He remembers the darkness. He remembers the weight of seeing his life as it truly was, and he remembers the light, the hand, the voice that said, "Go back." He lives differently now, not perfectly. He still makes mistakes, still loses his temper sometimes, still struggles with the same temptations. But there's a difference. When he fails, he doesn't make excuses. When he hurts someone, he apologizes. When Sunday comes, he goes to church. Not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. He looks at people differently too. Every face he passes might be one conversation away from eternity. Every interaction might be the ripple that changes a life. He doesn't know who will listen, who will believe, who will be saved from what he experienced. But that's not his job. His job is simple. Tell them what Jesus did. The woman at the grocery store, the man at the gas station, the stranger in the waiting room. He tells them about the flames, about the truth, about the hand that reaches into hell itself to pull souls home. Some think he's crazy. Some listen politely and change the subject. But some, a precious few, hear the truth behind his words, and their eyes change. Their questions deepen. And he knows that somewhere, in the invisible realm where eternity is decided, another name is being written in a book that will never burn. He's not a preacher, not a theologian. Just a father who died, went to hell, met Jesus, and came back with a message. A message that won't let him rest, won't let him stay silent, won't let him return to the comfortable sleep he lived in before. Because he knows now, hell is real, Jesus is real, and the choice we make in this short breath of life echoes forever. This story shakes us because it could happen to anyone. One moment changes everything. One choice echoes for eternity. If this testimony impacted you, if it made you think about your own life and what comes after, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button. This channel exists to share real testimonies like this one, stories that challenge us, that wake us up from spiritual sleep. By subscribing, you're joining a community of people who aren't afraid to face the hard truths about life, death, and eternity. Next, leave a like on this video. It helps more people find these stories, and someone watching tomorrow might need to hear this exact message. Then drop a comment below. Tell me, what part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it the descent into hell? The moment of rescue? The mission he received? Your comments create conversations that change lives. And here's the thing, this father's story isn't unique. We have dozens of testimonies from people who've crossed over and come back. Stories of heaven, hell, angels, demons, and divine encounters that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Check out the video appearing on your screen right now about the woman who saw her life's book in heaven, or the man who met his unborn children on the other side. Each story is different. Each one is real. Each one matters. Don't walk away from this moment unchanged. Subscribe, like, comment, and keep watching, because the next story might be the one that changes your eternity.